The rain slammed hard against the windshield of the limousine as it idled at a red light in the middle of downtown Chicago. Inside, Cameron Blackwell adjusted the cuffs of his designer tuxedo, barely paying attention to the blur of neon outside. He had just left a charity gala that raised over $2 million in pledges, none of which he could personally recall. Another evening, another headline. He loosened his bow tie and told the driver, "Take me to the peninsula, Nolan." As the car eased forward again, a sudden tapping on the passenger side window made him turn his head. At first he saw only water streaming down the glass, then eyes, a pair of fierce green eyes, child-sized. The driver hesitated. "Sir, should I—" But Cameron was already lower in the window, letting in a gust of wind and the scent of wet asphalt. A girl no older than 5, soaked to the bone, stood trembling on the curb. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "My mom. She's really sick. They're going to make her leave the hospital. We can't pay." Cameron studied the girl. Her pink dress was now clinging to her tiny frame, gray with grime and rain. Her sneakers were threadbare. Her hands were balled into tight fists, but her eyes didn't waver. "What's your name?" he asked. "Layla, sir. Layla Carson." Her lips were trembling, but her gaze was steady. "Mom needs a heart doctor. Please." Cameron looked down at the champagne glass still half full in the holder beside him, the velvet seat beneath him, his cufflinks catching the soft light. He had just given $10,000 to a cause he couldn't remember. Now a child stood at his door asking for help, real help. "Where is she?" he asked. "St. Margaret's Hospital, in the South Side." Nolan looked up through the rearview mirror, his expression uneasy. "Mr. Blackwell, your reservation—" Cameron silenced him with a raised hand. "Get in," he said to the girl, pushing the door open. She hesitated only a second before sliding onto the leather seat, careful not to drip too much water. "To St. Margaret's," Cameron said firmly. Layla sat stiffly, her tiny legs barely reaching the edge of the seat. Her wet clothes soaked into the leather, and she seemed very aware of it. "How long has your mom been sick?" Cameron offered her a towel from the minibar. "A while," she said, accepting it delicately. "But she fell last week. She couldn't get up. They said her heart's really tired." Her voice wavered, but her determination didn't. Cameron noticed the dirt under her nails, the uneven cut of her hair, the small scabs on her knees. Not neglect from a lack of care, but a lack of means. "What about your father?" he asked gently. Layla looked down. "Don't have one. It's just us." They rode in silence for a moment, the limousine cutting through the storm toward a darker part of the city. "How old are you, Layla?" 5.5, she answered proudly. "And you came all the way downtown alone?" "Mom taught me the subway map," she said, "for emergencies. But I didn't have money today, so I had to jump over the gate." Cameron stared at her. A 5-year-old running through the city in the middle of a thunderstorm, breaking onto public transit just to save her mother. "You're very brave," he said softly. She shrugged. "I promised Mommy I'd take care of her." When they arrived at the hospital, Cameron's frown deepened. The building looked ancient, the sign barely lit, graffiti tagging the walls. Layla was already climbing out. "This way," she shouted, tugging at his hand. The automatic doors opened with a groan, and the lobby reeked of antiseptic and mildew. People huddled in cracked chairs. A man with a head wound leaned against the wall, asleep. "We need to go upstairs," Layla said, tugging him toward a dark corridor. "Elevators broke Tuesday. We gotta take the stairs." The stairwell smelled of urine. The walls peeled, but Layla ran ahead like it was nothing new. "Mom's on the 3rd floor, room 304. She pushed through a half-open door and into a room partitioned by thin curtains. There were 4 beds, and one was occupied by a woman so pale Cameron stopped cold. "That's her," Layla said, rushing forward. "Mommy!" Cameron followed, then froze again. The woman, her face gaunt, red hair now dull, was someone he knew, someone he had once loved. "Elena?" he said. Her eyelids fluttered open. She smiled at her daughter, then looked up at Cameron, and the smile died. "Cam?" she whispered. Layla looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Before Cameron could answer, a doctor burst in, surprised to see him. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm Dr. Ramirez. You're covering her costs?" Cameron snapped out of his trance. "Yes, I want a full report, and I want her transferred." "Transferred?" "To Chicago General, tonight. I'll cover everything." Layla's eyes widened. "Really?" she asked. Cameron looked at the girl, then at Elena, his Elena. "Yes," he said. "We'll take care of everything." As the paramedics arrived, Cameron stayed by Elena's side. When she weakly protested, he held her hand. "We'll talk later. Right now you need to get better." Layla stood nearby, her face glowing with hope. Cameron watched her carefully. The green eyes, the chin, the quiet determination. And, suddenly, he did the math. Elena had disappeared 6 years ago. Layla was 5.5. He looked at her again and knew. She wasn't just a little girl begging for help. She was his daughter. The ambulance raced through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, lights flashing silently in the late-night gloom. Inside, Cameron sat next to Layla, watching her small hands clutch a worn stuffed bear she had pulled from her backpack. Elena lay across from them, unconscious but stable, wires and monitors surrounding her like a fragile web of borrowed time. Cameron couldn't take his eyes off her face, pale and hollow, but unmistakably the woman he had once wanted to spend forever with. He had spent 6 years convincing himself that what they had was a closed chapter, something he'd never get to explain, never get closure on. Now, that face frail and weakened was back in front of him, carried on a stretcher, bearing the weight of questions he never had the chance to ask. "Will she wake up soon?" Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cameron turned to her. "She's getting the help she needs now," he said gently. "She's going to be okay." Layla stared at her mother, worry etched into her small face. "She always says not to cry, that everything will be okay if we're brave." Cameron reached over, brushing a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "You were brave tonight, more than I've ever seen." "Mommy says I'm the reason she fights so hard," Layla murmured, "but sometimes I think she's fighting alone." The words pierced Cameron deeper than he expected. How many nights had Elena been sick in silence, refusing help, alone in the cold? How many birthdays, illnesses, crises had passed without him even knowing his own child existed? He studied Layla. The resemblance was undeniable now. The sharp cheekbones, the stubborn little chin, the way she locked eyes without blinking. She was his. The realization came not with panic, but a weighty calm. She was his, and nothing would ever be the same. At Chicago General, Elena was rushed into the cardiac ICU while Cameron and Layla were escorted to a private waiting room. Cameron pulled every string he had, called in every favor. His assistant sent a care package for Layla: clean clothes, books, a soft blanket. Nurses came and went, giving updates in hushed tones. Finally, Dr. Claire Monroe, a seasoned cardiologist, entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, greeting him with a nod, "Elena's condition is severe. End-stage cardiomyopathy. Her heart is failing rapidly." "What's the next step?" Cameron asked, standing. "She needs a ventricular assist device, immediately. It's a temporary solution, a bridge to transplant, but even that is risky at this point. What are her chances? With the device, she might stabilize. Without it, I give her days, maybe less." Cameron looked over at Layla, now curled up on a couch under the blanket, her small frame trembling as she held her bear tight. "Schedule the surgery," he said, voice firm. "Bring in the best." Dr. Monroe hesitated. "We need Elena's consent, and there are legal complications. She doesn't have a designated power of attorney." "I'll pay for everything," Cameron said. "Private team, full authorization." "That's not the issue. You're not legally family." The words stung more than he expected. "Then wake her up," he said quietly. "I need to speak with her." The doctor nodded and left the room. An hour later, a nurse appeared. "She's awake, weak but alert." Cameron followed her through the gleaming hallways until he reached a quiet ICU suite. Elena lay on the bed, a tangle of IV lines and blinking monitors surrounding her. Her lips were dry, her skin almost translucent, but her eyes, when they found his, were still the same green that haunted his dreams. "You're still here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question finally escaping. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "It's complicated. Try me. Your mother came to me, Cam," she said hoarsely. "When she found out I was pregnant, she said I was ruining your future, that you had a path, an empire to inherit, that there was no room for me, or her." She paused. "She offered money, then threats. Said if I didn't disappear, she'd destroy me." "You believed her?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You believed I'd let that happen?" "I was 23, she said, "alone, scared." And she showed me things, emails, conversations, things that made it sound like you knew, like you were part of it. Cameron stepped back, stunned. "I searched for you, Elena, for years. I hired people, went to your apartment. Your number was disconnected. I thought you were dead." A single tear slipped from her eye. "I thought I was protecting her, and maybe even you." Cameron walked to the bed, took her hand in both of his. "Layla is mine, isn't she?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. "Why didn't you tell me later, when she was born, when it got hard?" "I thought you'd moved on," she whispered, "that it was too late. And then I got sick. There was no time for the past." Cameron shook his head slowly. "It's not too late, not anymore." At that moment, the door creaked open. Layla stepped in quietly, eyes wide. "Mommy," she said softly. Elena smiled. "Come here, sweetheart." The girl ran to her side. "Are you okay?" "I'm better now," Elena said, brushing her daughter's cheek. "Guess what?" Layla whispered. "Mr. Cam is staying with us." Elena looked up at him. "Cam?" "She doesn't know who I am," he said gently. "Not yet. I didn't want to say anything until you were ready." "I always wanted a dad," Layla said quietly, "like in books." Cameron knelt beside the bed, level with the child. "Would it be okay?" he asked carefully. "If I stayed close, helped both of you?" Layla looked at her mother, who nodded faintly. "Okay," the little girl said, her voice tiny but certain. "But you have to promise something." Cameron raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "No leaving," she said. "Not even if it gets hard." Cameron looked at Elena, then back at Layla. "I promise." He stayed with them until the early morning. Doctors came to prep for surgery. Cameron helped Layla change into pajamas, sat with her as she fell asleep curled up in a hospital chair, then went to meet Dr. Monroe for final approvals. Before they wheeled Elena away, she looked up at him one last time. "Cam, if something happens, if I don't make it, you will," he said, "but I'll take care of her, no matter what." "She's your daughter," Elena whispered, "even if the world never knew." "Now it will," he said, "and so will she." As they wheeled her toward the OR, Cameron stood with Layla watching the doors swing shut. She reached for his hand. "She'll be okay," he said again, but this time it was Layla who squeezed his hand tight. "She has to be," the little girl said, "because you found us, and stories don't end like that." Cameron blinked back tears, realizing she was right. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The hours dragged by like shadows across the sterile floor of the surgical waiting room as Cameron sat motionless in the corner, one hand still clasping Layla's while the other rested idly on his knee, clenched without realizing. Every few minutes he glanced toward the double doors that had swallowed Elena hours earlier. Layla had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her small breath steady and warm, but Cameron's mind refused to rest. He had faced boardroom coups, billion-dollar negotiations, and media storms with less anxiety than this. He looked down at the sleeping girl who, only a few hours ago, had trusted him with the most important promise of her life. He couldn't fail her. Not now. Not again. Dr. Monroe finally stepped into the room wearing a surgical gown, her expression unreadable beneath the fatigue. Cameron stood immediately, heart pounding. "She's stable," the doctor said before he could ask. "The assist device is in place. It was a close operation, closer than we wanted, but she pulled through." Cameron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and closed his eyes briefly in silent relief. Layla stirred and blinked up at him. "Is Mommy okay?" she asked. Dr. Monroe crouched to her level. "Your mom is very strong, sweetie. She's resting now, but she's safe." Layla didn't say anything. She just climbed off the couch and wrapped her arms tightly around Cameron's leg. He picked her up and held her as if anchoring both of them to the ground. "When can we see her?" he asked. "She'll be in the ICU for the next 24 hours under sedation, but tomorrow morning you can visit. She's got a tough road ahead, but this gives us time to wait for a transplant." Cameron nodded and thanked her. He spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, holding Layla close while her little body gave in again to exhaustion. He didn't sleep. His thoughts spiraled, not with fear anymore, but with determination. He had found them, and no storm, no threat, no past mistake would take them from him again. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the narrow blinds as Dr. Monroe returned to guide them to the ICU. Layla clutched Cameron's hand tightly, wearing clean clothes he had arranged to be brought from a children's boutique the night before. Her hair was brushed, her face washed, but the nervous tremble in her lip betrayed her fear. When they entered the room, the beep of machines and soft hum of equipment surrounded them like a cocoon. Elena lay motionless but alive, tubes and wires draped over her frail form. Layla hesitated for just a moment before moving forward. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered, climbing up onto a chair beside the bed and gently touching her mother's arm. Cameron stood at the foot of the bed, watching the girl with a swelling pride he couldn't quite explain. Layla looked back at him. "She's still sleeping. She needs rest," he said softly, "but she knows we're here." Over the next few days, Cameron set his entire life aside. He canceled meetings, postponed deals, and authorized his assistant Robert to handle urgent matters without him. The Blackwell Empire would survive. Right now, his world was inside a hospital room. Layla quickly became a favorite among the nurses, always polite, always curious, always sitting beside her mother reading storybooks or coloring. Cameron brought her food, toys, and books, but she never asked for much. One evening, while watching Layla sketch quietly by the window, Cameron finally asked, "What do you like to draw?" "Mommy and me," she replied. "Sometimes I draw a dad too, but I make him different every time because I didn't know what he looked like before." He swallowed hard. "Want to draw me next time?" She looked up at him, her green eyes full of questions and wonder. "You mean, like a real dad?" "Like your real dad," he said. She looked away for a moment, as if processing something far too big for her little frame. "Mommy said you were her friend from long ago. She said you were nice." "She said that?" Layla nodded. "She said you liked books and used to walk her home." Cameron smiled at the memory. "I did. She always carried too many books and almost tripped every time." Layla giggled, the sound lifting the air like sunlight breaking clouds. "She still does that. One time she carried so many groceries we both dropped everything on the stairs." "She hasn't changed," he said, "but you've changed everything for me." "Do you really want to stay?" she asked, quieter now. "Even when Mommy gets better?" "I'm not going anywhere," Cameron said. "Not ever again." The next day, Elena finally woke. Her eyelids fluttered open to the sight of Layla snuggled on the chair beside her and Cameron resting in the corner, head tipped against the wall. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Layla." The girl's eyes snapped open. "Mommy." She jumped up and wrapped her arms around her mother gently, afraid to squeeze too hard. "You're awake. I knew you would be." Cameron moved quickly to the bedside, eyes full of emotion. "You made it," he said. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You stayed." "Always," he said. "We've got time now for everything." The days that followed marked the beginning of a new rhythm. Elena grew stronger, able to sit up for longer stretches, then walk with assistance. Cameron brought in a private tutor for Layla, determined to give her the education she deserved. He also hired a legal team to start the process of establishing paternity and securing joint guardianship. Elena resisted at first, but eventually gave in when Cameron showed her the plans he had drawn for a new home outside the city, a home with space, peace, and a library. "It's too much," she said one evening while he helped her into the hospital courtyard for fresh air. "It's what you both deserve," he replied. "It's what I should have given you 6 years ago." Elena looked out across the courtyard, her face touched by early autumn sun. "You didn't know, and I never gave you the chance. Now I do know, and I'm not letting this go." Layla joined them then, skipping toward the bench. She had drawn a new picture. 3 stick figures under a big tree. A tall man in a tie, a woman with red hair, and a little girl with a big smile. "That's us," she said. She said proudly, I drew your tie because you always look fancy." Cameron laughed. Elena blinked back tears. It was the first time their daughter had drawn them as a family without needing to imagine anything. That night, as Cameron left the hospital, he received a call. "Mr. Blackwell," said a voice he knew too well, his mother's. "We need to talk. Now." Cameron paused outside the hospital doors, looking up at the sky. A storm was coming, but not outside. It was time to face the past. Cameron stood outside the hospital, the phone still pressed to his ear. His mother's voice, cold and commanding on the other end, telling him they had to talk urgently, as if nothing had changed, and as if he were still the obedient son who once believed that family legacy mattered more than love, more than life itself. But now, everything was different. Now, he had seen what it meant to lose someone, real, to almost lose them twice. And he would not let that happen again. He ended the call with a firm, "I'll come tomorrow," and walked away without waiting for her response. The next morning, Elena sat up in her hospital bed, wearing a soft sweater and her hair loosely tied back. Her cheeks had regained color, and she looked more alive than she had in years. Layla sat beside her, reading aloud from a book they had borrowed from the hospital library when Cameron walked in with the coffee and a quiet smile. Elena looked up and asked, "Did you speak to her yet?" He nodded slowly. "I'm going this morning. Do you want me to come?" "No," he said gently. "This is something I have to do alone, and I don't want her to see you or Layla yet. Not until I know where she really stands." Elena nodded and squeezed his hand. "Just be careful, Cam. She doesn't like to lose, Cameron." Arrived at the Blackwell corporate tower just after 10, security still recognized him, of course, and the front desk buzzed nervously as he rode the elevator to the top floor, where the glass and marble office of Victoria Blackwell awaited him. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, finding her seated behind the massive desk, dressed immaculately in navy and pearls, as poised as ever. She didn't rise, but she folded her hands and studied him like a chess opponent returning to the board at the final move. "I assume this is about the girl," she said. "You assume, right?" Cameron replied. "You knew she was pregnant and you forced her to disappear." "I made a choice," she said calmly, "to protect you from a disastrous entanglement and to preserve what your father and I built, everything we gave you." Cameron took a breath. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to tell you I've found Elena and Layla, and I'm going to be a father to my daughter, your granddaughter." Victoria didn't flinch, but her voice tightened. "You're throwing away everything for a woman who manipulated you." "She didn't manipulate me," he said, his voice hard. "Elena gave up everything to protect our child, because you left her no choice and I missed 6 years of my daughter's life, because you decided who was worthy of our family." Victoria stood now, her expression sharp. "Do you have any idea what your life will become with this decision? The board will revolt your credibility. My credibility will unravel. We can offer support, a trust fund for the girl, private education. We can make this manageable." Cameron shook his head. "No. There's no offer, to make no control. No managing. I'm not asking for your permission or your blessing. I'm informing you, and if that costs me the company, so be it. I'll build something better from scratch if I have to." Victoria looked at him as if seeing someone she no longer understood, someone who had slipped out of her carefully arranged grasp. "You're serious, aren't you?" He stepped closer. "More serious than I've ever been. Layla is mine, and I love her, and I love Elena, and I won't let power or money or fear decide their future." She narrowed her eyes. "What will you do now?" Cameron turned toward the door. "I'll raise my family. That's what I'll do. And if one day you want to meet the granddaughter you almost erased, you'll come to me with something better than strategy. Try humility, and maybe you'll get a second chance." He left her office without another word, without looking back. Back at the hospital, Elena was being prepared for discharge. Her recovery from the assisted device was slow but stable, and she was being sent home with a detailed care plan and a team of private nurses. Cameron had rented a quiet house in the suburbs, a place with wide windows and a fenced backyard and a cozy study for Elena to write or rest, and a bright bedroom for Layla filled with books and soft blankets. When they arrived, Layla ran from room to room, shouting with excitement, while Elena stood at the threshold overwhelmed. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Cameron took her hand. "Yes, you do, and so much more." Layla came back and dragged them both into the living room where she had drawn a new picture. This one with 4 figures, a tall man, a red-haired woman, a little girl, and a small bundle cradled in the woman's arms. Cameron knelt and smiled. "What's this one about? It's a maybe," Layla said, giggling. "Mommy said, maybe someday I'll have a little brother or sister." Elena blushed and shook her head, but she didn't say no, and Cameron felt something settle deep in his chest, like peace, like home. Weeks passed and life took on a new rhythm. Mornings filled with pancakes and school lessons, afternoons with appointments and checkups, evenings with stories and laughter. Elena grew stronger day by day, her eyes brighter, her steps steadier. She began writing again, working on a children's book inspired by a brave little girl who ran through a storm to save her mother. Layla adapted quickly to the new school and made friends with an ease that surprised them both. She had her mother's empathy and her father's sharp wit, and her drawings now always had 3 figures, not 2. Cameron balanced work and home, and for the first time in years he felt whole. Then, one afternoon, as they were baking cookies in the kitchen, a knock came at the door. Cameron opened it and froze. Victoria. Blackwell stood on the porch holding a wrapped box and wearing an expression he had never seen on her before. Uncertain, raw human. Elena appeared beside him, surprised. Cameron said nothing, waiting. Victoria looked at Elena, then at Layla, who peered from behind her mother. "I came to apologize," she said simply. "No lawyers, no board members, no cameras. I realized how much I lost, and I'd like to meet her if she'll let me." Cameron looked at Elena, who gave a faint nod. Layla stepped forward slowly. "You're my grandma," Victoria's eyes. "Welled I am. If you'll have me." Layla tilted her head, then smiled. "Okay, but you have to help with dishes." Cameron laughed and pulled them inside, and for the first time in decades his mother sat at his table, not as an empire builder but as a guest, as a grandmother, as something more real than she had ever allowed herself to be that night when Layla was asleep and the dishes were done and the candles still flickered low. Cameron and Elena stood on the porch under the stars. He took her hand and kissed it softly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding us." Cameron wrapped his arms around her. "I didn't find you. Layla did, and she brought us all back where we belonged." They stood together quietly while the wind moved through the trees and the house behind them glowed with the warmth of something earned, not inherited, something built, not bought, something rare and forever and theirs.